After hearing yesterday's presentation of the budget by the Minister of Finance, I would like to know what exactly your views on the, what's the word I'm looking for? What are your views on the budget?
First of all, the language of the budget was very vague. Of course, it was very badly delivered. But the Minister of Finance spoke as if he was in the opposition. If you look at the language of the budget, it keeps saying what ought to be done, when what he should be saying in order to instill the confidence that is required is he should be saying what will be done. And hardly ever says that, and mostly all the time saying that, well, this ought to be done and that ought to be done and so on and so forth. So that's the first thing about the budget. I think the second most important thing about the budget is the statement of the Minister of Finance himself, that the last budget failed. I think his language was that the expected growth in the 2010-2011 budget did not materialize. So they spent over $50 billion, and instead of the economy growing as was predicted, there was negative growth.
So why do you think it did not materialize?
First of all, I think the money is not the only important thing in running a country, but you have to deliver so that your human resources are also important. I think what the government did was the government appointed party hacks and financiers and so on to these state corporations, and because they were really square pegs and round holes, they could not perform.
I see.
And they will not perform for this budget, 2011-2012, because they are the same people who are there. So that was the first thing. Mr. Dukaran did not tell us why the budget failed in the previous financial year. I think that is what he ought to have done. He ought to have examined why the budget failed and to indicate to us that that failure would be remedied. But he didn't do any such thing. In fact, he continued in the same way of making a lot of promises. And the promises really are not significant. First of all, there is the question of the 3,000 pension from the NIS. What that really means is that those people who were getting the maximum amount of pension from NIS, which is 2,000, will now get 3,000. But it also means that now that they're getting 3,000, they will not get old age pension. So that is gone. So they're taking with one hand and giving with the other, sort of thing. So I hope that people who are getting old age pension will realize that if they're also getting a pension from NIS, they will lose that. I've again heard for the umpteenth time that there'll be land for the landless. But even that was vague. Who are the landless? Is he talking about people who want land for building purposes? Or is he talking about people who want land for agricultural purposes? Or is he talking about people who want land for industrial purposes? Who are the landless that he's talking about? That too was rather vague. They also offers one of the goodies, if I may use that term, the $1,000 more that will be offered to officers in the prison service, the fire service, and the defense force officers. But that is really in the nature of a kind of a bonus, that there is no legal position for the recipients to be ensured that they will always get it. That $1,000 should have been incorporated into the salary that they have negotiated, and so that they are now assured of a level of salary. So when they talk about this being what a 15% rise, but we can't give you more than a 5% rise as in the public service. What they are really saying is that we will increase your salary, but at our women fancy. We can take that bonus, I don't know what they call it, allowance. I think they call it a duty allowance. So it's a duty allowance, but it's not incorporated into the industrial agreement that they have. And that is when it becomes meaningful, because it will also affect the gratuity and their lump sum payment and their pension when they retire. But as a gratuitous allowance, it does not affect their pension and so on. So that I think that they ought to look at that. I was also rather concerned that the Prime Minister, being ill, can be taking decisions on behalf of 1.3 million people. That is a dangerous thing. We read about working from home. If the Prime Minister is too sick to go to the office, how can she be too well to take decisions concerning the national welfare of the country? I think maybe that's why the budget is as it is. The budget, of course, is a budget that talks about a deficit. The question is, why do we need that deficit? We need that deficit because the government is spending more than it is receiving in income. Well, I think that that deficit would have been much less if the government had dealt with the question of mismanagement, waste, and corruption.
How would you have recommended that they deal with it? How?
Well, first of all, they could stop the wastage. There's been traveling, They've been doing exactly like the PNM of using the newspapers for public relations purposes. As a matter of fact, my information is that between June of 2010 and June of 2011, one newspaper was given over $30 million in advertisements. Now, the newspaper, I don't have to tell you which one it is, the newspaper of which I'm speaking is the one in which the editor has instructed that the Prime Minister's photograph should appear on the front page as often as possible. Now, the deficit could have been less if they dealt with things like that. Traveling, for example. It will be very interesting to find out how much the government has spent on traveling. And traveling, I don't mean only the airfares. I mean all the hotel bills and allowances and so on that ministers received. I think the nation will agree that that was overbearing and unnecessary. Propaganda, a lot of ministries are putting out full-page coloured advertisements in the papers, really saying nothing. Advertisements should contain information. They should say, for example, where the ministry is located and how you can get in touch with the minister, with an officer. In fact, that's the most difficult thing, is that you can't get in touch with ministers. People can't get in touch with them, whether by writing or by telephone or otherwise. These are the things I think the Minister of Finance could have been talking about to assure the nation.
In terms of agriculture, the share that was allocated to the military agriculture and food production, what are your...
Allocation of money, the amount of money allocated is not the only significant factor. The other significant factors are, what are the plans for agriculture?
Right.
What specifically will you do with that money? Or will it all go in paying wages and salaries? Right. So if it all goes in paying wages and salaries, then what is the purpose of the vote? in relation to the productivity that will come out of agriculture. That I think is not only relevant to the Ministry of Food Production, but to every other ministry. I see ministers saying, I am very happy with their allocation. But they're not saying what they're going to do.
Right.
They're not going to say what the priorities are.
Right.
Hopefully they will do that in the budget debate. So these are some of the things I have found with the budget. Also the Minister of Finance, I was very proud that he has spoken for 2 hours. Although after he had spoken for 2 hours, very few people know what is going to be done with the country for the next year.
Right.
I think it's time, the time has come for us to change the format of the budget speech. And we should look at the British. I think the British budget speech doesn't take more than half an hour. And what they do is they say how much money was spent
Right.
in the last year, how much was received, what they are going to do this year, how much they hope to receive, how much they hope to spend, what they hope to spend it on,
Right.
and what are the plans and programs for the ministries. I think that is what the budget should be. We developed a bad habit under Dr. Eric Williams, who would speak for 2 hours, and 1 hour and 3/4 would contain a lot of historical data and history and that sort of thing. But that's not the time to tell us about history. That's the time, the budget is a time to instill confidence in the people in the manner in which you deliver it. If you do it by stuttering and stumbling and so on, no matter what you say at the end of it, people are not going to have confidence, the confidence required. And that, I think, was one of the shortcomings in this budget. At long last, we have been trying to find out why the houses, 6,800 of them, I think, at the last count, of the Ministry of Housing, is not being distributed. There are people who are paying rent, $2,000 or $3,000 a month rent, and they're waiting for houses and they can't get them. And now the Minister Finance tells us that the reason those houses are not being distributed is because they are being repaired. That is to say, the contractors who built them badly. First of all, I would like to know if any of those contractors are getting building contracts under this government to build schools and so on, for example. I'd be very interested to know whether those same contractors who did bad work are being given contracts, but that's beside the point. The point is that the budget deficit would have been much smaller if the government had adopted another approach to those houses, and that is to value the houses as they are and sell those to people who are willing to buy them. The rent people are paying now, they would easily pay it on a mortgage, they would own the house, and they would repair the house for themselves, bit by bit, little by little, with friends and families and so on and so forth.
Now, to your critics, who would certainly respond to what you have just said, in the government, they may probably say, well, you know, other countries are surviving on deficit financing because of the global economic situation. How would you respond to them?
Well, the fact that other people are doing wrong doesn't mean that we must do it, but that is their condition. The question of a deficit is, you have to borrow.
Yes.
They are going to have to borrow this money. And who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay that? The citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. People who are working here, the ordinary people are going to pay back that deficit. So it is better that you didn't have a deficit, have a small deficit. And you can have that if you corrected the things I said. For example, the policy on housing.
Right.
Simple policy would save them millions and millions of dollars. if they would travel less, if there would be less corruption, if they appoint people who are fit to operate the state enterprises. All of that, I think, would have been a budget that would have put confidence in the people.
Thank you for your critical analysis of the budget, Mr. Panday. I would close by asking you one question. You spoke about us detracting from these long budget speeches. Is it that you're subliminally saying constitutional reform should be on the books?
Yes, as you talk about constitutional reform, the present government, the PP government, and I want to tell people, this is not a UNC government. I want to make that clear. People keep blaming the UNC for what is taking place in the government.
Right.
That is not the UNC, and it's not the UNC policy. That's the first point I wanted to make. But in any case, the PP government, while they were on the public platform campaigning, they promised constitutional reform. In the budget, the only word I hear about constitutional reform was the constitutional reform for Tobago.
Yes.
But what is required is constitutional reform for both Trinidad and Tobago.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Basdeo.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure. I like the